If you open your mouth, your mama loses her job and both of you end up on the street starving. That's how he said it, with that cold smile, like he was teaching me some kind of lesson. Think carefully, little girl. Better to be smart and keep quiet. My name is Esther Lou. Now that I've reached 80, sweetheart, I look back and see things only time knows how to sort inside a person's head. Things I carried for so long, stuffed into some dark corner of my soul, they almost didn't feel like mine. But they were, and still are. That's why I've decided to tell it now. When all of this started, I was just a skinny 9-year-old girl down in Alexandria, Louisiana. It was 1953, the kind of sticky heat that clings to your skin, that heavy southern air only folks who've lived down here understand. My daddy had been gone a long time, like many men do. One morning he got up, put on his hat, walked out the door, and never came back. Mama used to say it wasn't worth talking about him, not worth wasting words on a man who ain't no good, and that's how it was. Just Mama and me, trying to hold life together. Mama Martha was a strong woman, the kind that works till her soul aches just to keep food on the table. She cleaned houses for rich folks, did laundry for others, took sewing jobs when she could, and still there were nights we went to bed with our bellies tight. It was hard, you know. I watched her face wear down a little more each day, the fear of not making it, of having nowhere to run, of getting thrown out on the street with a little girl to feed. That's exactly why she took the opportunity when it came. It was Miss Watson from church who found the job. She said her employer, Mr. Bradford, needed a permanent housekeeper for his mansion. The pay was good. There was even the benefit of letting me come along, since Mama had no one else to leave me with. All she had to do was clean the house, polish the furniture, wash the linens, and prepare his afternoon tea. Mr. Bradford owned half of Alexandria. Banks, warehouses, land. Folks whispered his name like it was sinful to speak aloud. A widower. He lived alone in that huge 3-story mansion at the end of Plantation Road. Looked like something out of a movie. I remember the first time I climbed into that black car driven by his chauffeur, Mr. Joseph. I sat there quiet, clutching Mama's hand tight, a mix of fear and curiosity swirling inside me. At the house, they set me up in a tiny room up in the attic, all painted white, with a narrow bed and a tall window where I could watch the trees sway. That's where I stayed during the day while Mama worked downstairs. I brought my little books, my rag dolls, and a sewing box I liked to play with. I was obedient, just like Mama asked. Don't make noise, Esther Lou. Stay in your corner. At first, it was peaceful. Mr. Bradford would pass by sometimes, give me a polite nod, and keep walking. Mama would even say he was a good boss, that he paid well and treated her with respect, but I felt something strange whenever he looked at me, like he wasn't seeing a child, but some curious object, something else entirely. Things changed a few weeks later. It was one of those muggy August afternoons. Mama was down in the basement washing curtains while I played quietly with my dolls. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Slow, heavy steps. The doorknob turned slowly. When the door opened, it was him, alone, Mr. Bradford. He closed the door behind him gently, like he didn't want anyone hearing. I looked at him, confused. My heart started racing. He smiled. Not kindly, not friendly. You've been behaving up here, haven't you, Esther Lou? I nodded, too scared to speak. He stepped further inside. Good girl. Your mama really needs this job, doesn't she? I didn't answer. He knelt beside my bed and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear. My stomach twisted. At that age, I didn't know what to call what I was feeling, but I knew it was wrong. I knew. You know, Esther Lou, smart girls stay quiet and let adults handle things. That way no one gets hurt. You understand? That was just the first time he came upstairs. There were others after that. At first it was just talking. He'd sit in the corner chair and ask me questions I didn't understand. He asked if I had secrets, if I knew how to make people happy. I trembled inside but tried to look calm. I never told Mama. How could I? She barely slept from worry as it was. And deep down I knew. If I told, what would happen to us? We had no family, no one to run to, only that job. His visits became more frequent. The touches started to change, first on my head, then my shoulder, then, well, you can imagine, can't you, sweetheart? But always with that calm tone, that sweet voice that froze my blood. Remember, Esther Lou, if you open your mouth, your mama loses her job and both of you end up on the street starving." He said it so naturally, it almost sounded normal, like a lesson. I was a child, but old enough to understand blackmail, and I was scared, very scared. At night, I would curl up in my little bed, clutching my rag doll, praying. I begged God to make him forget about us. I prayed for rain so heavy no one could leave the house. I asked for Mama to find another job. I prayed, oh how I prayed. But every morning the sun rose and everything started all over again. And that, sweetheart, was how the hole inside me first started to be dug. And back then, it wasn't even close to the bottom yet. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, my dear. This old lady here feels a little lighter knowing where you're listening from. I used to sit on that narrow little bed, holding my doll tight, listening to the creaks of the wooden floorboards outside the door. His steps were always slow, like he wanted me to hear him coming. It was never sudden. He wanted me to know he was on his way. That was part of it. The waiting was a kind of punishment itself. The first few times I hoped it was just visits. Maybe he was only curious. Maybe he'd stop. But he didn't. Every week, sometimes more, those steps climbed up. Always when Mama was busy. She'd be down scrubbing the kitchen floors or polishing the silver. She never heard a thing. She trusted me to stay upstairs and behave. And I did. I stayed. I behaved. Because what else could I do? He never shouted. Never threatened like men on the street did. No raised voice, no ugly words. He smiled. Always that quiet, heavy smile. The kind that made my skin cold even in the sticky Louisiana heat. "You're such a smart little girl, Esther Lou," he whispered once, sitting right at the edge of my bed, fingers resting on my shoulder. "You know how important it is to keep secrets, don't you? That's what makes you special." I nodded, because nodding was safer than speaking. Those visits stretched longer. At first his hands would stay at my shoulders, my head. Later his fingers wandered. My stomach twisted every time. I froze, pretending I wasn't there, pretending I was just a doll too, stuffed with cotton, without feelings, without breath. I was 9. I didn't have words for what was happening, but I knew it wasn't right. Children always know when something's wrong, even if the grown-ups dress it up pretty and tell you to call it something else. After each visit, I cleaned my hands over and over, like I could wash away the invisible dirt. I tried to pray it away too, but my prayers felt small inside that big house, swallowed up by the tall walls and heavy curtains. Mama never noticed anything. She was grateful for the job. The pay was good. For the first time, we had real meals every night. The landlord stopped banging on our door asking for rent. She started smiling again, humming while she washed dishes. I couldn't take that from her. Not when she finally had a little peace. "You see, sugar," she'd say, wiping sweat from her forehead, "things are finally turning for us. God answered my prayers." I wanted to tell her that maybe he'd only answered half, that maybe he'd forgotten me up in that little white room. The mansion itself had a strange smell, like old wood mixed with something sweet and heavy that never left. Even on bright mornings, it felt dim inside. Too many closed doors, too many locked cabinets. Bradford moved like a shadow through his own house. The servants rarely spoke to him. They kept their heads down and stayed busy. Mrs. Carter, the cook, sometimes glanced up when I passed by the kitchen. Her eyes were kind, but tired. I wondered if she suspected. Sometimes I caught her watching me with that same look Mama gave me when I was sick, worried but helpless. She never said a word. One day he brought me a little gift, a ribbon, pale blue, soft silk, "For your hair, Esther Lou, to make you even prettier," he said softly, tying it himself. His fingers brushed my neck. My body stiffened. Pretty girls get nice things, and good girls don't cause trouble. "You're good, aren't you?" I whispered yes. My voice barely worked anymore when he was near. As summer dragged on, the heat thickened, and so did his visits. Mama worked more hours as Bradford found more chores for her downstairs. He was clever like that, always keeping her out of the way without making her suspicious. One afternoon, something different happened. As he sat beside me, his hand resting heavier than usual on my leg, the door creaked. A sound downstairs. His head snapped up. He whispered sharply, "Not a word, Esther Lou." The fear in his voice was new. For a second, I saw something crack in him. Not guilt. No, never guilt. It was fear of being caught. Mama's voice floated up the stairwell, calling for me. "Esther, honey, come help me with the sheets." He stood up quickly, straightened his suit, smoothed his hair. "Go on, child. And remember, quiet mouths keep Mama safe." I ran downstairs so fast my knees nearly buckled. Mama smiled, wiping her hands on her apron, clueless as ever. "Come on, baby girl. These sheets are heavy." I forced a smile and helped her. My hands trembled with every corner we tucked. She didn't notice. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My stomach knotted so tight I thought I might vomit. My chest felt heavy, like something sat on top of it. The ribbon lay on my nightstand, untouched. I hated that ribbon. I wanted to tear it apart but couldn't bring myself to touch it. Weeks passed. The pattern continued. He grew bolder, more comfortable. He was careful not to leave marks, not to make sounds, not to push too far too fast. Always controlling, always planning. Sometimes I wondered if maybe this was my fault somehow. Maybe if I hadn't smiled that first time. Maybe if I had run. But run where? We had no one, no family, no friends with enough space to take us in. One evening, Mama sat with me at our little table back home after another long day. "I know it's hard being up there all day, sugar," she said softly, "but this job's a blessing. Just a little longer, and we'll be okay. Maybe one day we won't have to serve nobody no more." I wanted so badly to cry, to tell her everything. My mouth opened, but no words came. The lump in my throat was too big. I swallowed it back like I always did. Bradford knew exactly where to aim his threats. Mama depended on him. I depended on Mama. And so I stayed quiet. But even at 9 years old, a seed had started growing inside me. A quiet anger, buried under all that fear. I didn't understand it yet. I only felt it, like a hot stone sitting deep in my belly, waiting. And he wasn't finished yet, not even close. The days blurred into each other, like the sticky heat that clung to my skin every morning. I woke up with that same knot inside my belly, the one that never left. Every creak in the floorboards, every shift in the wind outside the thin window made me stiffen. I never knew when the next visit would come. That was part of his game, the not knowing, the waiting. Mama remained proud of that job. She started walking lighter, humming old gospel songs as she ironed his shirts. Her back stood a little straighter every time she handed him his wages. I watched her from across the room, my chest tightening, knowing what he bought with that money. He bought her peace, my silence. He never touched Mama, never raised his voice to her. That was the worst part. To everyone else, he was kind, generous even. He paid on time, never scolded, never belittled. His reputation made sure no one would ever believe me, should words ever leave my mouth. That was the brilliance of his cruelty. Nobody suspected the monster behind the smile. Each visit, he pushed a little further, like testing the strength of a rope before pulling harder. His hands no longer hesitated. They traveled where they pleased, like he owned every inch of me. I stared past him, fixing my gaze on the little chipped spot on the wall behind his head, trying to float away. I told myself if I didn't move, if I didn't fight, it would end quicker. My body stayed, but my mind drifted somewhere far, somewhere safe, where Mama still braided my hair and sang to me before bed. One morning, Mama came into my tiny room upstairs, wiping sweat from her forehead. She looked at me, concerned, brushing my bangs away from my face. "You feeling all right, baby? You look pale." I forced a weak smile, nodding. My stomach twisted at how close she was to seeing, and yet so far. She kissed my forehead, whispering, "I don't want you getting sick now. Lord knows we can't afford no doctor." I wanted her to keep that softness in her eyes, so I swallowed the truth again. The other maids kept their distance from us, maybe out of respect, or maybe they suspected and didn't want trouble. Mrs. Carter continued to glance at me now and then, her lips pressing tight whenever Bradford passed too close to where I sat. Once, as I helped Mama fold sheets, Mrs. Carter softly placed her hand over mine. She didn't say anything, just a quick squeeze, her eyes heavy with something that looked like guilt or pity. I didn't know which. Bradford started leaving little gifts more often. Trinkets, a small porcelain bird, a hairbrush with silver bristles, a tiny pink locket. "For my special girl," he'd say, his voice smooth, syrupy. The locket stayed locked in the drawer. I couldn't bear to wear it. By late September the air shifted. The heat broke, but the unease inside me grew thicker. He'd begun staying longer during his visits. His hands no longer paused at my shoulders. One afternoon, the door opened again, but this time, something in his eyes had changed. Less patience, less pretense. His steps were quicker. He sat closer, his breath warm against my cheek. "You know, Esther Lou," his voice barely a whisper, "it's time you stop pretending you don't enjoy our little time together." My chest locked tight. My fingers dug into the mattress. My voice wouldn't work, not even to cry. His hand reached my chin, tilting my face toward him. The weight of his stare pressed against my skin like something sharp. "I've been patient with you, haven't I?" he whispered. "I've given you gifts, protected your mama. But patience runs thin, little girl." That seed of anger inside me pulsed hotter, but fear crushed it down before it could bloom. I stayed still. I always stayed still. Before he could continue, heavy footsteps echoed from downstairs. It was Joseph, the driver, calling for him. "Sir, your banker's arrived." Bradford straightened quickly, smoothing his tie. He smiled, placing a finger on my lips. "Later, my sweet. Don't worry." And just like that, he slipped away, leaving the air colder than before. The following night, I barely touched my dinner. Mama noticed, but assumed it was the heat or nerves. "You need to eat, sugar," she whispered. "You're still growing." I stared at my plate, wondering how many more times I'd have to pretend. One evening, when the leaves finally started to turn, I caught Mrs. Carter's eyes again. This time, she pulled me gently into the pantry under the staircase. Her voice was barely audible. "Child, does he do things to you?" Her eyes darted toward the door as if the walls themselves might snitch. My lips trembled. I didn't answer, but my silence spoke louder than words. Her face tightened. She sighed, her voice shaky. "I knew it. Lord, forgive me. I knew it." I whispered, "Please don't tell Mama." Her hands cupped my cheek softly. "I won't. But you be careful, baby, be careful. Some men, they ain't right." Tears welled up, but I blinked them back. She patted my head and hurried off before anyone noticed. For the first time, someone knew. Someone saw me. And yet, nothing changed. The next morning, as Mama packed our lunches, she smiled like nothing in the world was wrong. "He told me yesterday that I might get more hours soon. Isn't that good news?" My stomach twisted again. More hours meant more time alone upstairs. As winter crept closer, Bradford's visits became bolder. He no longer waited for quiet afternoons. Sometimes, even with other staff downstairs, he'd sneak into my room. Every creak of the stair sent my heart into my throat. Every shadow made my skin crawl. My prayers became desperate bargains with God, but no answers came. The weight inside me grew. That seed of quiet anger buried itself deeper. It didn't die. It simply waited. Because even at 9, I knew something was building. Something that one day would no longer stay buried. I stopped feeling like a child that winter. Something inside me hardened, like frost creeping over the edges of my heart. The part that used to hum lullabies with Mama or giggle over the tiny doll dresses she'd sew was shrinking until it barely breathed. Instead, I learned to listen, really listen, to the house itself. The distant sounds became my warnings. The rhythm of Joseph's heavy boots outside, the clang of Mrs. Carter's pots, the squeak of the front door hinges. Every creak, every sigh of the old wooden mansion spoke to me like ghosts whispering which direction danger might come from. He never stopped. If anything, the cold seemed to make him more eager. The thick carpets muffled his steps even better when the house grew quiet under those grey skies. And he always found a way to send Mama away. Errands, extra cleaning assignments, even small deliveries across town for his business partners. She never questioned him. She was too grateful, too blind. He made sure of that. One afternoon, as the wind rattled the shutters outside my tiny window, he entered again without knocking. He no longer bothered pretending. My body stiffened as his shadow filled the narrow doorway. His breath smelled of whiskey that day. I'd never smelled it on him before. Not like that. He sat on the bed beside me, his weight making the thin mattress sag. His hand rested heavy on my leg, fingers squeezing gently, as if testing the strength of my bones. "You're growing up, Esther Lou," he murmured, his voice lower, slower. "You're not a little girl anymore." My stomach turned. I didn't know how to answer, so I said nothing. My silence seemed to excite him more. "You know, someday you'll understand what all this means. You'll thank me. I'm teaching you things no one else can." His hand slid further up, and my heart pounded so loud I was sure he could hear it. I wanted to scream. The scream lived in my throat like a cage animal clawing to get out, but fear kept it locked. I stared at the chipped paint on the far wall, counting the cracks like prayer beads. That was my trick now. Count the cracks. If I counted enough, maybe time would pass quicker, but it never passed quick enough. After he left, I sat for hours on the cold floor, hugging my knees so tightly my arms ached. I whispered to myself in the dark, over and over, like a chant. "It's not forever. It's not forever." But even I didn't believe it. Christmas came. Mama decorated our little apartment with scraps of red ribbon and handmade paper stars. She even saved enough to buy me a small book, fairy tales with bright-colored drawings. She was so proud to hand it to me, eyes shining, cheeks flushed from cold and joy. "See, baby? We're doing all right now. Next year, maybe I can get you a real doll again." I held the book like it was made of glass, nodding, thanking her. But the words on those pages felt distant, like lies meant for someone else. Princesses and happy endings were for other girls, not for me. At the mansion, Bradford gave me a Christmas present, too. A pair of shiny leather gloves, soft and expensive. He wrapped them himself, placing them in my lap with that same awful smile. "Something to keep your hands warm, my sweet girl," he whispered, stroking my cheek. His gifts always made my skin crawl. They weren't kindness. They were trophies, proof of how well I obeyed, how silent I remained. Mrs. Carter kept watching me. Her face had changed since that day in the pantry. She avoided being alone with me, but always found ways to squeeze my shoulder gently when passing by, like trying to give me strength without words. She knew, but knowing and acting were two different things. And back then, acting meant danger for everyone. As the months dragged on, I noticed how Bradford became more reckless. The careful timing faded. Sometimes he came even when Joseph was still on the grounds. He liked the risk. It thrilled him. One afternoon, he arrived earlier than usual. Mama was out buying supplies downtown. The house felt eerily quiet except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. When he entered, there was no greeting this time, no sweet words. His eyes held something sharper. He locked the door behind him. My breath caught. "We don't have to play these games anymore, Esther Lou," he whispered, stepping closer. "You're ready now." My heart pounded so violently I thought I'd faint. His hand reached out, but before he could touch me, voices floated up from outside. It was Joseph speaking with a man at the front gate. Bradford froze. For the first time, real anger flashed across his face. He clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly. Then, as if reminding himself of his own rules, he smiled again. "Next time," he whispered coldly. "Next time, little bird." He slipped out, closing the door softly behind him. I collapsed onto the bed, trembling. My body shook so violently my teeth chattered, though the air wasn't cold. That night, for the first time, I allowed myself to cry where Mama could hear. She came rushing into my room, sitting on the edge of my bed, pulling me into her arms. "Oh, sugar. Oh, baby, what's wrong?" she whispered, rocking me gently. I couldn't say it. My mouth opened, but only sobs came. She stroked my hair, humming softly like she used to when I was little. "You just had a bad dream, that's all," she murmured. "Everything's all right now. Mama's here." I wanted to scream that everything was not all right, but instead I let her believe the lie, because the truth would destroy her, and Bradford knew that. That was the hook he held me on. Days turned into weeks again. The tension inside me coiled tighter and tighter like a spring. Even as I followed Mama to work each morning, dressed in my plain cotton dress, braid tight, face pale, something inside me was shifting. The fear didn't fade, but something else was growing beneath it, something darker. A part of me had stopped believing that staying silent would protect us forever. I didn't know how yet, but deep in my gut, I felt it. The longer he pushed, the closer I was to breaking. Spring arrived. but nothing inside me softened with the blooming trees. If anything, the green outside made the rot I carried feel even heavier. The world went on, as though my life hadn't been unraveling behind that mansion's thick curtains for nearly a year now. Mama's face lit up every morning as she buttoned her uniform. She started humming louder, believing this job was pulling us out of the life we'd barely survived before. She had no idea that while she scrubbed his floors, I was upstairs shrinking smaller by the day under his shadow. Bradford's confidence grew bolder as the months passed. He stopped pretending altogether. No more soft threats or careful hands. Each visit pushed deeper into the parts of me that still clung to childhood. The way he spoke shifted too. Now his words carried something colder, as though I belonged to him fully, like a possession no one could question. "You see, my girl," he whispered one afternoon, standing behind me as I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, "there's no one in this town who'd believe a poor child like you. Your mama depends on me. You depend on me. Best you remember that." His breath touched the back of my ear as his hand slid down my shoulder. I stopped nodding when he spoke, not because I was brave, but because even that small act of agreement made me feel complicit in ways I couldn't bear anymore. Instead, I sat silent, barely breathing, praying for any distraction that might pull him away. The house had become a prison. Every corner, every hallway held his presence. Even when he wasn't near, I could feel him. His scent lingered in the fabrics. His eyes haunted the mirrors. I learned to move quietly, calculating each step to avoid him when I could. But he always found me. Mrs. Carter continued watching, her glances growing heavier with guilt. She must have heard things she never spoke aloud, seen shadows passing where they shouldn't have. One day, while Mama dusted in the dining room, Mrs. Carter pulled me aside near the back staircase. Her hand gripped my wrist tightly. "Listen to me, baby," she whispered fast. "If it ever gets worse, if you feel like you can't breathe no more, you run. You hear me? You run and find help." My throat tightened. My voice barely escaped. "Run where?" She blinked hard, her eyes filling. "There's always somewhere, someone." Before I could answer, footsteps approached and she released me instantly, returning to her duties like nothing happened. Her warning echoed in my head for days afterward. I couldn't imagine where escape even existed for us. Our world was this mansion, this job, this nightmare. Mama remained blind. She believed we were finally safe, finally stable. She spoke often of dreams she carried, maybe one day buying a tiny house of our own, starting a small sewing shop for extra income. She spoke as though the future was something gentle and kind. I listened, nodding, carrying the weight of my silence like a stone sinking deeper each time she smiled. The more he pushed, the more the anger inside me twisted into something sharp. I stopped crying when he left my room. Instead, I stared out the small window at the vast trees, wondering how long it would take to walk far enough that he couldn't find me. I fantasized about disappearing into the woods, becoming nothing but a story folks whispered about. The poor girl who ran away one night and was never seen again. But I was 9. 9-year-olds don't know how to vanish. They only know how to hide. One evening something shifted. Bradford came later than usual, after dusk. His mood was different, impatient, restless. He smelled stronger of liquor this time, his eyes glassy but focused. "No more waiting, Esther Lou," he whispered as he entered. "No more games." His hand reached for me faster than usual. My breath locked inside my chest and my legs froze. I couldn't even pretend to float away this time. My stomach churned so violently I thought I might be sick right there. His grip tightened on my arm, pulling me closer. The weight of his body pressed into mine, his voice hissing against my cheek. Suddenly, voices erupted downstairs, loud, unexpected. Joseph had returned earlier than expected with visitors. 2 men speaking with Mama about a delivery mix-up from the local grocer. The sound startled Bradford. He pulled away abruptly, jaw clenched, breathing heavy. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. "Another night then," he spat, frustration cutting through his usual calm. "But soon." He slipped away into the hallway like a shadow dissolving into the dark. I sat there shaking, my hands gripping the bedpost so hard my knuckles whitened. My head spun. Something inside me broke that night, not from fear, from the sheer weight of how close he'd come. The following morning, my body ached, but I forced myself to follow Mama as we returned to the mansion. The usual rhythm resumed like nothing happened. The world kept turning, indifferent to the terror living beneath its skin. That day, as I passed Mrs. Carter in the pantry, she didn't speak. She simply pressed a small folded piece of paper into my palm before stepping away. My fingers uncurled the paper slowly when no one was looking. On it, a name and an address scribbled in shaky handwriting. A woman's name, someone I didn't know. The address sat just outside Alexandria. For the first time in months, my pulse stirred with something different. Not hope exactly, not yet, but a flicker of possibility. That night, while Mama slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, clutching the tiny piece of paper under my pillow. My mind spun in circles. I didn't know what this woman could do. I didn't know if I'd ever be brave enough to find her. But as Bradford's threats echoed through my head like a broken record, that flicker inside me burned a little brighter. Days after receiving that folded piece of paper, I carried it everywhere, hidden inside the lining of my dress, close to my skin, like some fragile secret that might save me if I ever dared to use it. I touched it often, pressing my palm against my chest whenever I passed Bradford in the hallways, as if the small slip of paper could shield me from his gaze. But each time I considered acting, the same fear strangled me. What if going to that address made things worse? What if he found out before I even reached the doorstep? Mama continued floating inside her bubble of hope. She'd started bringing home fabric swatches from the market, sewing little things in the evening by lamplight, humming softly while her fingers worked the needle. She talked about opening a small shop one day where we could sell dresses and mended clothes. I just need a little more time, sugar. A few more months saving up, and maybe we can get our own place, she whispered one night, her eyes sparkling with a dream that felt too far from where I sat. I nodded, swallowing the scream that threatened to rip through my throat every time she spoke about the future. I envied her for still being able to dream, for still believing that good men like Bradford existed. She couldn't see him, not like I did, not like Mrs. Carter did. Each morning, I followed her back to that mansion, the same grand house that watched me like a hungry mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I moved like a shadow now, avoiding corners where I knew his eyes might catch me. But shadows only hide so long before they're caught. One afternoon, as Mama worked upstairs replacing curtains, I sat in the corner of the library, pretending to read from one of Bradford's leather-bound books. He entered the room quietly, as he always did. His steps made no sound against the thick carpet. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. His presence pressed into the space like thick smoke. "You've been avoiding me," he said softly, his voice slicing through the air. I held the book tighter, my fingers trembling. He approached, standing behind me, his hand landing heavy on my shoulder. "You're not being very grateful, little bird. After all I've done for you and your mama." His grip tightened, his voice thick with quiet rage. My lips trembled. I whispered, barely audible, "Please, don't." That word only seemed to thrill him more. His fingers slid down my arm, squeezing. "You don't get to say no, Esther Lou. You know better than that by now." Suddenly Mama's voice rang from upstairs, calling my name. She needed help with the heavy drapes. Bradford paused, jaw tightening. His fingers slipped off me, but his breath remained hot against my ear. "Soon," he hissed. "I'm done waiting." He disappeared as quickly as he arrived, leaving the room colder despite the heat outside. My chest heaved, and my knees nearly buckled when I stood. That night, my mind spun endlessly. The paper burned against my skin like it wanted to be used. Mrs. Carter's words echoed louder now. To run, to find help. But how? I had no idea where that woman lived. I couldn't even read the address clearly, the handwriting shaky, letters curling awkwardly. Even if I reached her, would she believe me? Would anyone? I was only a poor maid's daughter, and he was Bradford. The following week, he became more reckless, less careful about the staff noticing his movements. The fear inside me sharpened into something uglier, a tight knot of desperation. I started waking before dawn, stomach twisting, hands clammy even in the cool morning air. Then came the day when everything shifted again. It was raining hard, heavy Louisiana rain that soaked the streets and filled the gutters. Mama arrived early that morning, leaving me alone upstairs while she helped prepare a luncheon Bradford was hosting for some of his business partners. The house buzzed with activity downstairs. Cooks, servers, drivers rushing in and out. But upstairs, it was quiet. Too quiet. The door creaked open behind me and my breath froze before I even turned. His shadow filled the doorway, shoulders stiff, eyes dark. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The lock clicked. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. "No one's coming this time," he whispered. "The house is full, but no one hears a thing up here. You know that." He moved closer, his hand reaching for me. I stepped back instinctively, pressing myself against the corner of the room. My body trembled, but this time something cracked inside me. Fear still ruled me, but behind it, anger screamed, the heavy, silent kind that builds after being trapped too long. "Please stop," I whispered, voice shaking. He smiled, tilting his head like I amused him. "You still don't understand your place, little bird? After everything, you still believe you have a choice?" His hand grabbed my wrist, fingers digging into my skin. I winced, tears blurring my vision. My body froze, like every time before, but my mind screamed louder. Then a loud knock pounded on the door. Startled, Bradford dropped my wrist instantly, turning toward the sound. Mrs. Carter's voice carried through the heavy wood. "Sir, your guests are asking for you." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and sharp. His jaw clenched, breath heavy through his nose. He didn't respond to her immediately. The knock came again, firmer this time. Finally, he hissed under his breath, "Later." He unlocked the door and slipped out into the hallway, leaving me crumpled in the corner, gasping for air. That night, something in me finally tipped. I stared at the paper under my pillow for hours before my hands stopped shaking enough to hold it steady. I studied the address, trying to memorize each looped letter. Tomorrow, if I could find the courage, I would try. I didn't know how far it was or whether I'd even make it, but staying meant drowning. Mama slept beside me, peaceful as always, unaware of how close the walls were to collapsing around us. My throat ached from holding the truth down so long. I wanted to wake her, to pour every secret out into her lap, but the fear of breaking her kept me silent once again. The rain poured outside all night, drumming against the thin roof like a warning. My stomach churned with both terror and something new, something almost like determination. By morning, I had made my decision. My hands were still shaking, but my feet felt steady for the first time in months. The morning air carried a strange stillness, like the house itself sensed what I was about to do. My chest tightened as I dressed quietly, tucking the folded paper inside my sleeve. The address felt heavier than any weight I had ever carried, yet somehow lighter than the dread that had lived inside me for so long. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear this time. It was something else now, something sharper, louder, like the beginnings of a scream that had lived caged inside my chest for too many months. Mama prepared our breakfast like every other morning. She smiled as she slid a small plate of grits in front of me, humming softly. She had no idea that today wasn't like the others. My voice stayed trapped behind my lips as I forced each bite down my throat, nodding when she spoke about new fabric patterns she wanted to buy from town. When it was time to leave, I followed her to the mansion as I always did. The large white columns stood tall and cold against the blue morning sky. From the outside, nothing betrayed the sickness that lived within its walls. The staff moved through their chores like usual, heads down, voices low, pretending everything was ordinary. But every step inside those halls felt heavier now. I knew what waited for me upstairs if I stayed silent another day. Bradford's eyes followed me when I entered. His smile tightened as he passed us in the entryway, nodding politely to Mama. She greeted him kindly, completely unaware of the poison swirling behind his polished teeth. "You're early today, Miss Martha," he said smoothly. "The linens arrived this morning if you'd like to begin with those." Mama thanked him and walked toward the back hallway. I stayed rooted for a moment as his eyes fell back on me. His voice lowered, almost inaudible. "Stay close, little bird. I'll be seeing you shortly." He moved past me like a wolf circling its prey. My stomach flipped, but I gripped my sleeve tighter, feeling the corner of the paper digging into my skin like a blade, reminding me what had to be done. While Mama busied herself with the linens, I slipped away toward the servant's door near the kitchen. My heart hammered so hard my ears rang, but I forced my feet forward, one step at a time. No one stopped me. No one questioned a child carrying a small basket as though I had been sent on an errand. My face remained still, though inside I was screaming so loudly I thought it might break through my skin. The back door creaked open, spilling me into the early sunlight. The world outside the mansion felt wider than I remembered, as though I hadn't truly seen it in months. The street stretched long ahead, unfamiliar, but calling to me like a distant voice. My legs moved faster than my thoughts, carrying me toward the dirt road that led away from everything I had known. I didn't know where I was going exactly. The address was still a mystery to my young eyes, but I recognized the name scrawled on the paper. Miss Lillian Turner. Mrs. Carter must have trusted this woman. That was enough for me. The streets blurred as I walked, my breath shallow but steady. The further I moved from the mansion, the lighter my chest felt. Each block carried me farther from his reach. The morning sun warmed my back, but the fear never left. I kept expecting to hear his voice call from behind, or worse, see Joseph's car pulling alongside the road to drag me back. But no voices came. No car appeared. The houses grew smaller as I reached the edge of town. Finally, I found a narrow dirt path that matched the directions Mrs. Carter whispered to me days before. My feet moved on instinct now, carried by something deeper than thought. When I spotted the small white house, tucked behind a row of overgrown bushes, my knees nearly buckled. This had to be it. I hesitated at the gate, breathing hard. My hand shook as I reached for the wooden latch. Every horrible possibility screamed through my mind. What if she wasn't home? What if she refused to help? What if this was all some mistake and Bradford would find me before anyone else did? But behind all that panic, the same voice that pushed me to leave whispered one final time, if not now, never. I stepped through the gate and walked up the narrow path. The porch creaked under my weight as I reached the door. My fist hovered for a moment, then knocked softly. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Footsteps approached from inside. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman with grey streaks in her hair, wearing a faded blue dress and thick glasses perched low on her nose. Her eyes narrowed at first, confusion painting her face as she studied me. Before I could speak, my voice cracked. "Are you Miss Turner?" She nodded, looking me over more carefully. "I am." I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears spilled down my cheeks as my voice finally broke free. "Mrs. Carter. She told me to come. Please, I need help." Her face softened instantly, her eyes widening as she opened the door wider, motioning for me to step inside. She closed it behind me gently, leading me toward a small sitting room. "You're safe now, child," she whispered, her voice calm but firm. "No one's going to hurt you here." The weight of her words nearly crushed me. My legs gave out, and I collapsed into the small wooden chair. For the first time in almost a year, I allowed myself to cry without holding back. My sobs came hard, my entire body shaking as though everything I had kept trapped was finally clawing its way out. Miss Turner knelt beside me, her hands resting gently on my trembling arms. She didn't ask questions right away. She simply sat there, letting me fall apart in front of her without judgment or demand. She waited for my storm to pass. When my cries softened into quiet gasps, she spoke again. "You don't have to say it yet, but when you're ready, I'll listen to all of it. You hear me? Every bit." I nodded weakly, clutching my chest, where that folded paper still rested. For the first time, the mansion felt far behind me, but I knew deep down that Bradford wasn't done. He would come looking, and whatever happened next would be darker than anything I had faced so far. The hours that followed blurred together like rain streaking down a window. Miss Turner gave me tea I could barely hold, my hands shaking as though they belonged to someone else. She spoke gently, not pressing, waiting for my breath to steady before asking anything. The house smelled of old books and lavender, a strange comfort after months of suffocating under Bradford's scent. Each breath I took inside her walls felt cleaner, like I was finally pulling air into lungs that had been starved far too long. I didn't know how to begin. My voice felt foreign in my throat, like it had forgotten how to form the words I'd swallowed for nearly a year. Miss Turner sat patiently across from me, her face calm but alert. as if she understood the weight behind my silence without needing to hear the details yet. When the words finally stumbled out, they came tangled and raw. I told her pieces at first, small fragments that slipped through the cracks. His visits, the locked door, the threats, the promises that if I ever spoke, Mama would lose everything. My voice cracked each time I tried to say more, but she never rushed me. She simply nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes never widened in shock. She didn't gasp or look away. Instead, there was a quiet sadness that lived in her expression, one that told me this wasn't the first time she had heard such things. She had seen other girls like me, girls caught in the jaws of men like Bradford, men who wrapped their sickness in money and charm. "You're safe here, Esther Lou," she said softly after I'd emptied the worst of it. "And your mama, she doesn't know any of this, does she?" I shook my head, fresh tears slipping down my cheeks. "She thinks he's helping us. She thinks he's a good man." Miss Turner reached for my hand, her grip firm but kind. "That's how they work, child. They pick the desperate, the poor, the ones with no one to turn to. But you turned. You came here." Her words sank deep into my chest, but fear still gnawed at the edges of my courage. "He'll come looking. He'll find me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "He may try, but you're not alone anymore." As dusk settled outside her windows, the weight of exhaustion pulled at my body. She led me to a small bedroom, simple but warm, where I collapsed onto the bed. The mattress felt too soft, unfamiliar after months of stiff sheets and cold corners. But my body surrendered quickly. Sleep pulled me under like a deep river, and for the first time in months, no footsteps creaked toward my door. When morning light crept through the thin curtains, Miss Turner sat by my bedside with a plate of warm biscuits and jam. She waited until I ate, then began speaking quietly. "There's someone I know," she said carefully. "Someone who can help us speak to the law. Not the sheriff, not yet. Someone who listens. Someone who's made men like Bradford answer for what they've done." My heart raced at the thought of anyone challenging him, but behind my fear was a flicker of something I barely recognized anymore. Hope. "But if we speak, won't he come after Mama?" My voice trembled as the words escaped. "That's why we'll move carefully," she assured me. "We'll keep you safe first. Then we'll figure out how to protect your mother too." The plan sounded impossible, but her confidence steadied me. She had done this before. She knew how deep Bradford's reach extended, how far men like him were willing to go to keep their secrets buried. The next days passed with a strange kind of quiet. I stayed hidden inside her house while she left to make arrangements. Each time the door closed behind her, I pressed my ear against it, listening for signs of danger. Every carriage wheel outside, every raised voice sent my pulse racing. But she always returned unharmed, bringing news each time. "He's looking for you," she whispered one evening as she slipped inside. "His men are asking around town, but they don't know where you are yet. Mrs. Carter has kept your secret, so far." The mention of Mrs. Carter filled my chest with a painful gratitude. I wondered if she feared for herself now, if Bradford suspected she had guided me here. As days stretched into a week, I began to find small moments where I could breathe again. Miss Turner allowed me to sit near the front window sometimes, hidden behind the lace curtains, watching the world outside continue as if nothing had changed. Children played. Women carried baskets from the market. Life moved forward while mine remained paused in this fragile hiding place. One afternoon, Miss Turner returned with a man I didn't recognize. He was middle-aged, dressed plainly, with kind but serious eyes. He introduced himself softly, kneeling so his face met mine directly. "My name's Reverend Parker," he said. "I help girls like you, Esther Lou. Miss Turner told me everything. I need you to tell me too, when you're ready." The thought of retelling it all made my stomach knot, but his voice was gentle, his patience real. With Miss Turner beside me, I spoke again. This time the story flowed steadier, though my voice broke often. Every word cut into my throat like glass, but I pushed through. I had to. When I finished, Reverend Parker sat back quietly, his expression tight. "He won't touch you again," he said firmly. "I promise you that." His confidence felt like a strange light shining into the corners of my mind where fear had lived so long. But even as he spoke those words, I saw the shadow behind them. Bradford wouldn't let this go easily. Reverend Parker spent the next days visiting town officials quietly, gathering trusted people to build what he called protection. The law couldn't be trusted yet. Not everyone in Alexandria would risk crossing a man like Bradford, but there were others, ones who had seen what power unchecked could destroy. Each night I lay awake in that small bed, wondering when Bradford would realize where I'd gone, wondering if he already knew and was waiting to strike. The silence felt heavier with every passing hour, like a storm building far off in the distance, gathering its strength. And then one morning, Miss Turner entered my room early, her face pale, her voice low. "He knows, child," she whispered. "He knows where you are." My blood ran cold. My breath caught in my chest. The storm had finally arrived. The moment Miss Turner spoke those words, my body went cold, like winter had crept into my bones. I had always known this day would come, but knowing and feeling were not the same. My breath tightened, and I gripped the edge of the quilt as if it might hold me steady while the world beneath me shifted. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting on mine, her voice calm but weighted. He sent one of his men asking questions down the street. Not the sheriff yet, but close enough. "He's pressing. He wants you back before too many people start asking the wrong questions." I could barely hear her over the pounding in my ears. My mind ran wild with images of Bradford storming through the door, his voice low and quiet, like always, but his hands ready to drag me back to that house. My stomach twisted so hard I thought I might be sick, but Miss Turner held my hand tighter, grounding me before the panic could swallow me whole. "Reverend Parker's coming soon. We've planned for this, Esther Lou. You knew we couldn't stay hidden forever." I nodded slowly, my throat too tight to speak. My fingers clenched around the small silver cross she had given me 2 nights before. Not because I was particularly religious anymore, but because having something to grip made me feel less like I might float away. Every hour that passed felt like days stacked on top of each other, the weight growing heavier, the air inside the small house thick like it wanted to choke me. I stayed close to the window, peeking between the lace curtains, scanning every face that passed. Each man with a wide hat or black suit made my chest seize. Each carriage wheel rattling down the road made my feet tense, ready to run if the time came. Reverend Parker arrived by late afternoon, his face tight, his coat damp from rain. He spoke with Miss Turner in hushed tones while I sat frozen in the corner, pretending not to listen, though every word felt like a blade against my ribs. "He's running out of patience. Bradford's got money reaching places we don't. The sheriff won't move unless we force him to, and the church board's nervous about getting involved directly. But I've spoken with Judge Hawthorne. He's different. Quiet, but fair. If we can get the girl's full statement in front of him, we may have a chance." Miss Turner's voice never wavered. She stood firm, her back straight, eyes fierce like she had stared down men like Bradford before and wouldn't flinch for him now. Reverend Parker nodded. "We'll need to move her tonight. The longer she stays here, the more dangerous it becomes." He paused, lowering his voice further. "If Bradford suspects who's protecting her, he won't hesitate. He's desperate now." I couldn't hold the words in any longer. My voice broke through my tight throat like a cracking branch. "What if he finds Mama?" Both of them turned to me at once. Miss Turner moved first, kneeling in front of me, her hands steady on my shaking arms. "We've thought of that too, child. Reverend Parker's people have spoken with your Mama. She doesn't know the full truth yet, not until it's safe, but she's being watched. She won't be alone." That eased something inside me, but not enough to loosen the knot entirely. Mama still lived in a world where Bradford was a kind man who'd given us a lifeline. She had no idea what that lifeline had cost me. Nightfall crept in faster than usual, the sky a deep purple that felt heavier than darkness. I sat quietly as Miss Turner packed a small bag with a few of my clothes, some bread wrapped in cloth, and a silver cross tucked carefully inside. "You won't be gone long," she whispered, "just until Reverend Parker can get you in front of Judge Hawthorne. Once that's done, Bradford won't be able to touch you." Her voice sounded certain, but I saw the tightness behind her smile, the fear she tried to hide. She knew this was a gamble. A man like Bradford didn't lose quietly. A soft knock rattled the door. My whole body stiffened as Miss Turner rushed to the window to peek outside. "It's him. It's all right." She opened the door, allowing Reverend Parker inside, along with another man I didn't recognize. taller, broader, his face marked with sharp features, but kind eyes. "This is Samuel," Reverend Parker explained. "He'll be the one to take you." I stared up at him, unsure whether to trust anyone anymore, but Miss Turner nodded firmly. "He's safe, child." Samuel didn't speak much. He simply extended his hand, helping me to my feet. The bag felt heavier than it should have in my small hands. My legs trembled, but I forced them forward, letting him guide me out the back door into the cool night air. The carriage waited behind the house, hidden by trees. No lamps were lit. Samuel lifted me gently inside, covering me with a heavy wool blanket. The door shut softly behind me, sealing me inside the darkness. He climbed onto the driver's seat, and the carriage rolled forward, wheels crunching over dirt and gravel, carrying me deeper into the unknown. As we rode, I clutched the edge of the blanket to my chin, listening to every sound outside, certain at any moment Bradford's men would appear, blocking the road, pulling me back to that house. My breathing stayed shallow, my eyes wide, watching shadows flicker between the trees as the carriage bounced down the rough road. Samuel spoke softly once, sensing my fear. "You're doing good, little one. Just a bit further." His voice didn't shake. It steadied me somehow, like an anchor keeping me from drifting completely into the panic swirling inside me. After what felt like hours, the wheels finally slowed, and the carriage came to a full stop. Samuel climbed down, opening the door and helping me onto the ground. Ahead, a small cabin sat quietly, tucked beneath a canopy of trees. The windows glowed with soft light. Inside, safety waited, or at least the closest thing to it I had known in a long time. Judge Hawthorne stood at the door, older with silver hair and steady eyes that studied me carefully but kindly. He didn't smile, but his voice was warm. "You've been very brave, Miss Esther Lou. We're going to fix this, but you'll need to tell me everything. Every word." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, but I nodded. The storm wasn't over, but I had crossed into its eye. What came next would be harder than anything I had faced yet. Bradford wouldn't go down without a fight, but for the first time, the fight no longer belonged to me alone. The small cabin smelled of old wood and pipe smoke. The air inside was thick, but not suffocating like the mansion had been. Here, the walls didn't watch me. The floor didn't creak under the weight of footsteps I feared. The windows didn't carry reflections of his shadow. Instead, everything stood still, waiting for me to speak. Judge Hawthorne sat at a small table near the fireplace, a notebook and pen ready in front of him. His presence wasn't cold, but it was serious. Not a man interested in stories, a man searching for truth. Miss Turner stayed close, sitting just behind me, her steady hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Samuel stood near the door, arms crossed, keeping watch. Reverend Parker poured tea from a kettle, setting it quietly beside me without a word, as if even the clink of the cup might shatter the fragile air holding everything together. Judge Hawthorne cleared his throat softly. His voice was calm, low. "Esther Lou, I'm going to ask you to tell me everything you've endured. You are safe here. No one will interrupt you. No one will judge you. But I need your words, child. All of them. The law needs to hear them exactly as they are." His eyes didn't shift or glance away. He faced me fully, offering the respect no one else had given. My hands shook as I held the cup, the warmth grounding me just enough to begin. The words came slower this time, heavier, more precise. I spoke of how it started, how his visits began quietly, how the touches changed, how the threats grew. I told him about the locked door, the pressure in his voice, the fear that strangled my lungs every morning before I heard his steps. Every time my voice cracked, Miss Turner squeezed my shoulder gently, grounding me like roots, holding me still against the storm building inside me. I told him about the gifts, the ribbon, the porcelain bird, the locket that still lay untouched inside the drawer at the mansion. I spoke of the way he smiled, not kindly, but like a man who knew he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. When I reached the part where his threats turned sharper, when he started whispering that my mother would lose her job, her home, her dignity if I spoke, my throat closed. I paused, squeezing my eyes shut, willing my voice not to break completely, but I pushed forward. I had to. Judge Hawthorne never interrupted. His pen scratched softly across the paper, but his eyes never left mine. When I spoke of the moment in the rain, when Bradford locked the door, and hissed that no one would hear my screams, something shifted in the judge's face, a slight tightening of his jaw, a brief narrowing of his eyes, the only betrayal of emotion he allowed. When my words finally ran dry, silence filled the room like thick fog. No one moved, no one spoke. My chest heaved as though I had run for miles. I didn't realize I was crying until Miss Turner handed me a handkerchief, her touch warm against my clammy fingers. Judge Hawthorne set down his pen carefully. His voice was steady but carried a weight behind every word. "You've done something very brave today, Miss Esther Lou. Very brave. I will carry this statement forward. Bradford will answer for what he has done. His power doesn't reach this far. Not anymore." Those words felt like distant bells ringing somewhere far off, their sound both terrifying and freeing. Bradford would answer, but I also knew him. He wouldn't wait for the law to move first. Samuel stepped closer, speaking for the first time in hours. "We should keep moving. If word gets back to Bradford before Judge Hawthorne can act, he'll send more than questions next time." Judge Hawthorne nodded in agreement. Arrangements had already been made to move me further, to a place outside Alexandria's reach entirely. A family connected to Reverend Parker's congregation would take me in, keep me hidden until the case could be built strong enough that even Bradford's influence wouldn't matter. As Samuel helped me gather my small bag again, Miss Turner leaned in close, whispering softly, "You've already survived the hardest part, child. What's coming will feel heavy, but the worst is behind you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted those words to be true, but deep down, the knot in my belly warned otherwise. The carriage rolled through the dense trees under a moonless sky, darker than any night I remembered. The air smelled of wet earth, thick and heavy. Every sound outside, the crack of branches, the distant hoot of an owl, felt sharper, like the world itself had drawn its breath in with me. Samuel drove fast but careful, keeping to back roads I didn't recognize. Every turn twisted deeper into places that looked forgotten by the town. But even out here, far from the mansion, Bradford's presence hovered behind us like a shadow stretching too far. Hours later the carriage slowed, stopping near a small farmhouse nestled behind fields of tall grass, swaying gently under the wind. A lamp glowed inside, and two figures waited at the doorway. A middle-aged couple stepped forward as Samuel lifted me gently from the carriage. Their faces were kind but cautious, as though they knew how fragile I still was. "This is Mr. and Mrs. Collins," Samuel introduced softly. "You'll stay with them now. They know why you're here. They'll protect you." Mrs. Collins pulled me into a careful hug, her hands gentle but firm. "You're safe now, honey," she whispered. "You rest. We'll handle the rest." Inside they prepared a small room for me, plain but warm, the bed freshly made, the curtains drawn. As I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands folded tightly in my lap, Mrs. Collins placed a warm glass of milk beside me. "You sleep now," she said gently. "No more worrying tonight." But sleep didn't come. I lay in the dark, staring at the thin crack of light beneath the door, waiting for shadows that never came, hearing footsteps that weren't there. My mind replayed every moment inside the mansion like a cruel film I couldn't shut off. I had escaped his house, his hands, his whispers, but not his reach. And deep down, I knew Bradford wouldn't let me slip away without a fight. The nights inside the Collins farmhouse were quieter than any place I had ever known, but quiet didn't bring peace. It only made the noises inside my head louder. Every creak of wood, every gust of wind brushing against the windows made my muscles tighten. I listened for footsteps that never came, bracing for hands that wouldn't reach me here, but my body didn't trust the silence yet. Bradford lived inside me now, even though his house stood far behind. Mrs. Collins moved through the house gently, like she understood how easily I might break. She never asked questions, never forced conversation, but her eyes always searched my face, watching for cracks she could catch before I slipped too far. Mr. Collins stayed mostly outside tending the land, but each evening, before supper, he would sit quietly at the table, nodding softly when I entered the room, his kindness steady but distant. They both knew what hung over this house, even if my mouth rarely spoke it aloud. News arrived in careful pieces through Reverend Parker. He came every few days, always after dark, slipping quietly through the back door, sitting at the kitchen table with Mr. Collins while I listened from the staircase, my breath held tight. The case was moving. Judge Hawthorne had filed the petition. Bradford's name now sat inside court records where he could no longer erase it. But the process crawled slowly. Every paper filed felt like one stone placed against a flood, and Bradford was the storm pushing against it. One night, Reverend Parker's voice lowered, heavier than before. "Bradford knows you're alive, child. He knows you're speaking. His men are nervous. He's losing grip, and that makes him dangerous." I sat at the top of the stairs, my knees pulled tight against my chest, hearing every word even though they spoke as if I couldn't. "The next few days will be the hardest," Miss Turner added softly. "He'll try something desperate." Those words settled inside my stomach like cold lead. I wanted to believe the law would move faster than Bradford, but I knew the world better now. Men like him had lived untouched for years because they knew how to pull the strings, how to bend people around their money, how to make fear speak louder than truth, and then, finally, it broke. The letter arrived early one morning, brought by a man Reverend Parker trusted. Judge Hawthorne had secured the warrant. Bradford was being summoned. The trial wouldn't wait any longer. The storm that had hovered above my head for months finally began to crack open, and for the first time, the wind shifted in my direction. They moved me once more, this time not to hide but to witness. I entered the courthouse through the back, my legs trembling but my feet steady, carried by something stronger than fear now. I wasn't the girl frozen on the edge of the bed anymore. I wasn't the doll he used to reposition with his hands. I was Esther Lou, standing in the place where his power no longer reached. Bradford sat at the table, his face tight, no longer smug. His eyes met mine only once, and for the first time, I saw something behind them I had never seen before. Panic. His lawyers twisted words, tried to soften the truth, but the words I had spoken stood tall behind me. The truth lived in my voice now, and for once, it was louder than his. When the sentence was finally read, the room held its breath. Years he would serve, and though part of me knew years could never erase what had already been done, it was enough to finally close the door he used to walk through so easily. As they led him away, his eyes darted toward me again, but this time his mouth stayed shut. The man who used to whisper his threats so calmly now had nothing left to say. When the doors closed behind him, I let out the breath I'd been holding for nearly a year. My body shook, not from fear, but from the weight leaving me at last. Miss Turner's hand found mine, squeezing gently. "You did it, child," she whispered. "You did it. And now, after all these years, after carrying this for so long, I finally sat down to tell you, my dear, because some stories need air to stop poisoning the soul. If you've listened all the way, leave your like here, my love. It's like a little hug for this old heart. And write me in the comments where you're watching from. Tonight, this heart finally breathes lighter."